Ever find yourself feeling, just disproportionately crushed by a really small setback? Or maybe a tiny piece of criticism felt like this huge personal attack that just derailed your whole day. It's a feeling I think many of us know well, this sense of being maybe easily overwhelmed sometimes. Today, we're taking a deep dive into precisely why that might happen. Okay, let's unpack this. Our topic today is psychological fragility. Now, our insights for this deep dive, they come straight from some really powerful lectures by Mr. Mustafa Goma. He is a leading academic in Dubai. And he's done, frankly, an incredible job distilling the foundational work of Dr. Walid Arafa's profound book, also called Psychological Fragility. So our mission for you today is really a shortcut, a way to get truly well-informed on this topic. We're going to explore what psychological fragility actually is, where it stems from, how it shows up in our lives, its ripple effects, and maybe most crucially, how we can build, incredible resilience to navigate life's inevitable challenges. This is a topic that genuinely touches everyone, I think.
And you might find some surprising insights in the sources we looked at today. So let's jump right in. What exactly is psychological fragility, according to this academic work? Because here's where it gets really interesting. It's probably not what you first think.
Right. And a key insight from Dr. Arafa's work, which Mr. Goma summarizes so well, is that psychological fragility isn't really about weakness, not in the sense of like a character flaw. It's actually defined as a state of emotional and psychological immaturity.
Immaturity. Okay.
Yeah, think of it less like a defect and more like a developmental stage that hasn't quite fully matured yet. And this immaturity, it shows up as an inability to effectively cope with difficult situations, or to absorb criticism well, or even fully embrace responsibilities. And what you'll often observe is individuals tending to, evade confrontation rather than dealing with it head on.
Oh, okay.
So for instance, instead of, say, addressing a conflict with a colleague directly, someone exhibiting this might subtly avoid that person. Or maybe even try to get someone else to mediate, rather than having that tough, direct conversation themselves.
That distinction is really powerful, isn't it? That it's immaturity rather than weakness. Yeah. It kind of shifts the whole perspective.
Yeah.
Makes it less about a moral failing and more about a set of undeveloped internal tools. Is that fair?
That's a great way to put it, exactly. Undeveloped tools. And so if it's a developmental state, the sources highlight several key factors that contribute to someone becoming psychologically fragile, things that kind of build this immaturity.
Okay, so what are they? What makes someone more likely to develop this?
Well, one significant factor mentioned is what's termed a pampering upbringing without challenging training. Basically, when individuals are maybe overly shielded from discomfort, from failure, from the natural scrapes and bruises of life, they just don't develop that crucial internal grit. It's almost like never letting a child fall down and learn to get back up on their own. They never really learn how to balance or recover. So this directly hinders resilience because they've been protected from the very experiences that, forge it.
So it's almost like we're inadvertently teaching them not to cope by protecting them too much.
Yeah.
And I can't help but wonder, how does our increasingly digital world play into this? Because that's where so many people spend so much time now.
That's a really critical point. Mr. Goma emphasizes this idea of poor friction with reality as a result of relying on the digital world. Think about it. Our constant digital interaction often presents a very sanitized, curated version of reality. You can block out opinions you don't like, unfollow accounts that make you uncomfortable, only engage with stuff you already agree with.
Yeah, you create your own bubble.
Exactly. And that limits your exposure to the genuine complexities, the disappointments, the sort of unvarnished truths of the real world, the kind of messy experiences that actually develop psychological toughness. You lose the nuance of, say, face-to-face negotiation or dealing with difficult, real human emotions in real time.
That's fascinating and a bit counterintuitive, maybe. Because you could argue online communities also build resilience sometimes, like finding support groups or getting information fast. But what you're highlighting from the source is the friction, that lack of raw, unedited reality.
Precisely, that lack of necessary friction. And building right on that, another major contributing factor is what the source calls the culture of immediate comfort and impatience.
Immediate comfort.
Yeah, it sounds nice, right? Who doesn't want comfort? But Mr. Goma points out how this seemingly innocent desire is actually eroding our ability to bounce back. It makes even minor delays or frustrations feel like overwhelming obstacles sometimes. If we're constantly seeking instant gratification, constantly avoiding any effort or challenge that requires patience, that requires perseverance, well, we just diminish our psychological flexibility, our adaptability. That mental muscle just kind of atrophies.
Wow, that's a really powerful observation. So it's not just impatience, it's actively eroding our internal flexibility. And what about our internal compass, like guidance?
Yes, the final major cause discussed is a lack of role models and a disciplined inner voice. Seeing how others navigate challenges, how they cope, that provides a crucial blueprint for resilience. We learn by watching. And without seeing that modeled or without internalizing those lessons into an inner voice that guides, self-regulation and motivation, it's incredibly difficult to develop those capacities on your own, which then, as the source implies, raises an important question. If you didn't have those role models early on, how do you begin to cultivate that crucial inner voice later in life?
Right.
It often requires a very conscious, deliberate effort. You have to actively build what wasn't maybe inherently nurtured.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty clear picture of what psychological fragility is, that immaturity piece, and why it might take root. Now, for you listening, how do we actually spot it? What does this look like playing out in real life? Maybe even in ourselves or people we know. What are the signs?
Well, you'll see several key manifestations according to the research. First, there's excessive sensitivity to criticism or pressure. And this isn't just, feeling a bit stung when someone criticizes you. We all feel that sometimes. It becomes more of a debilitating reaction where even mild, maybe constructive feedback feels like a personal attack. You might see someone completely shut down or get really defensive or maybe even lash out in response to something that for a more resilient person might just be a point to consider or learn from. Then, another very common sign, and quite telling, is the constant search for external justification and blame.
Ah, the blame game.
Exactly.
Okay.
This means an individual tends to blame, external circumstances or other people when they face difficulties or failures, rather than taking responsibility or sort of analyzing their own role and looking for internal solutions. They'll say things like, oh, it's not my fault, the system is rigged, or if only my boss hadn't done X, then I would have succeeded.
Right.
This behavior, it directly reflects that inability to self-cope, and it's really an escape from responsibility. And as you can imagine, it's incredibly damaging to personal growth.
Yeah, I can certainly picture that scenario playing out, especially maybe in the workplace. It must make it very hard to move forward to learn.
Absolutely. Then there's also withdrawal from any situation that requires rigidity or decision. So individuals might consistently opt out of challenging tasks or avoid leadership roles, maybe pull back from personal commitments, basically to sidestep perceived difficulty or the need to make a tough call.
Like avoiding promotion opportunities.
That's a perfect example. Consistently turning down chances to manage a challenging project, even if it's a clear path upwards, because the perceived difficulty or maybe the potential for failure just feels too overwhelming. They'd rather stay in their comfort zone than push through that discomfort. And finally, a very visible sign can be mood swings and the amplification of emotions. Minor stressors, things that might just annoy someone else, can lead to disproportionately strong emotional reactions. It makes it incredibly difficult to regulate feelings. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, as the source material suggests, it significantly impacts relationships because others can find these really rapid, intense shifts unpredictable and, frankly, quite draining. It makes collaborative problem solving incredibly challenging. Imagine trying to resolve even a small conflict with someone whose emotional reaction just jumps from 0 to 100 over a minor misunderstanding.
Yeah, it's really easy to see how these individual behaviors can quickly ripple outwards then. And when they do, this isn't just about one person's discomfort, is it? What does this actually mean for our relationships, our work, even our wider communities? What are the broader effects here?
Exactly. The impact goes beyond the individual. At that personal level, it clearly leads to the impairment of personal and professional growth.
Yeah.
If you can't handle criticism or take responsibility, it directly hinders learning, skill development, career advancement. It just makes it fundamentally hard to improve or progress.
Makes sense.
It also results in the poor formation of balanced relationships. That excessive sensitivity we talked about, the tendency to blame others, those unpredictable mood swings, they really erode trust. They prevent the development of deep, resilient connections. Because healthy relationships need vulnerability, they need mutual responsibility. And both of those are really challenging for someone struggling with psychological fragility. It can create a dynamic where others feel like they're constantly walking on eggshells.
That sounds incredibly draining, yeah, for everyone involved.
It really is. And then on a broader scale, it contributes to the creation of a fragile and unproductive work or education environment. When a whole group or team lacks resilience, it really impacts teamwork, innovation, overall output.
How so?
Well, think of a team where maybe no one wants to take responsibility for a mistake, or where difficult conversations are constantly avoided. What happens? Unresolved issues just fester, projects stall, progress gets stifled because maybe no one is willing to step up or deal with necessary conflict constructively.
Right. Things just don't get done effectively.
Yeah, exactly. And the really critical takeaway here, I think, is how these individual traits can scale up and affect larger systems, specifically by disabling the ability to make realistic decisions. A fear of confrontation or an inability to process difficult information objectively can lead to poor choices or indecision, or even just outright avoidance of necessary actions. And that impacts everything from business strategies to community planning. When individuals fear the potential fallout of a decision more than anything else, they might simply not make one, or they make a suboptimal one just to avoid that immediate discomfort.
That paints a truly sobering picture. But, okay, there's always hope, right? This isn't presented as some kind of life sentence.
Yeah.
Now for the really crucial part. What can we do about it? How do we actually build psychological toughness? What are the proactive strategies that Mr. Goma's lecture outlines for, treatment and prevention?
Absolutely. This is where the actionable strategies come in, and they are, I think, incredibly empowering. First, it's essential to consciously develop coping skills and actively take responsibility. This means learning practical strategies to manage stress, understanding that you do have agency in how you respond, and consciously owning your actions and choices rather than defaulting to deflecting blame. It's really about building your internal toolkit for life's challenges.
Okay, building the toolkit.
Yeah. And a core strategy, often uncomfortable but remarkably effective, is gradually challenging oneself in uncomfortable situations. Gradually is key. This challenge helps the individual build their ability to adapt, to withstand stress over time. Crucially, it reduces that excessive sensitivity to challenges, which is what really enhances psychological resilience in the long run. Think of it like building a muscle, right? You start with lighter weights, you gradually increase. So a small, actionable example. Maybe intentionally striking up a brief conversation with someone new if that makes you nervous, or volunteering to lead just a small part of a project that feels a bit outside your comfort zone. It's about those tiny, intentional steps.
I really like that idea of gradually challenging. It makes it feel much less daunting. You don't have to leap off a cliff immediately.
Precisely. It's about manageable steps. We also need to exercise emotional control and cultivate self-awareness. This involves practicing techniques to recognize and regulate emotions before they amplify and take over.
Like what kind of technique?
Well, it could be mindfulness practices, maybe journaling to understand your traps better, or even just consciously taking a moment to breathe before responding in a heated discussion. It's about fostering that disciplined inner voice that helps you pause, assess, and choose your response instead of just reacting impulsively. And finally, it's vital, according to the source, to seek exposure to real experiences that develop psychological toughness. This means actively stepping away from maybe an excessive reliance on the digital world and consciously seeking out diverse, hands-on, and yes, sometimes challenging real-world interactions.
Back to that friction idea.
Exactly. That's where true grit is often forged, navigating the unpredictable, sometimes messy reality of life. It could be learning a new skill that requires physical effort, or traveling somewhere new where things don't go exactly to plan, or maybe engaging in a community project that forces you to collaborate with lots of different personalities. Which brings us to a question maybe for you, the listener. What one small, slightly uncomfortable situation could you perhaps challenge yourself with this week just to take that first step?
That's a powerful call to action indeed. We've really journeyed through understanding psychological fragility today, from its definition as emotional immaturity, through its causes rooted in upbringing and modern culture, to how it manifests in our behavior, and finally, its significant ripple effects on both individuals and society. And, most importantly, we've explored some concrete, actionable strategies for treatment and prevention, focusing on building that crucial psychological toughness. We really want to express our immense gratitude to Mr. Mustafa Goma for his invaluable lectures and articles. They so clearly summarize Dr. Walid Arafa's foundational work on this vital topic. Their insights truly are a fantastic shortcut to understanding a complex and important aspect of, well, the human condition.
And for you, our listener, maybe just consider how even those small, consistent steps outside your comfort zone, how they can cumulatively build immense psychological strength over time. It really is a journey, isn't it? Not a destination. And every challenge met builds that resilience muscle just a little bit more.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We would genuinely love to hear your opinions on this topic, and also what other subjects you'd like us to deep dive into next time. Please do leave us a comment and subscribe to ensure you don't miss our next exploration.